Okay, hello everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kavita Dogra. I am the Communications and Development Manager here at ONN. If you're new to ONN, welcome. We are the provincial network for Ontario's 58,000 nonprofits and charities focused on policy, advocacy, and services to strengthen Ontario's nonprofit sector as a key pillar of our society and economy. If you are a member of ONN, welcome back and thank you for your support. Our public policy research and advocacy work would not be possible without you. If you experience any technical difficulties, please feel free to put it in the chat and I will try my best to help you. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat box or through the Q&A box. To answer our most common question, you will receive a recording and the slides and any additional resources that are relevant to today's chat. To ground our webinar today, I want to begin with acknowledging that we are meeting on unceded and unsurrendered land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from time immemorial. The ONN office, which is where I am today, is located on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. This territory is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. At ONN, we believe that as nonprofits, we must take seriously our role in responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Canada Commission's 94 calls to action. On a personal note, it was Earth Day yesterday, and this past weekend, I took my daughter to her first tree planting event, and she enjoyed mulching. She's a 1.5, so she can't exactly shovel into the ground, but she sure did try. And as I try to build her connection to the land that we live on, I'm mindful to also teach her about how Indigenous peoples have, cared for and stewarded the lands we live on, again, for time immemorial, and that in the face of a climate crisis, Indigenous knowledge of our lands is critical to mitigating the impacts. So, a few quick reminders as we gather today. We ask that all participants act with respect for one another in this virtual space. This looks like respectful language used in the chat or Q&A box. Take time to tend to your needs. Be mindful of how you engage in the chat or discussion today, making sure there's space for everyone to participate. If there's, again, anything you need, technical support or otherwise, you can direct message the ONN team, which is me, online. And we're here for a short time, but I will pass it on as quick as I can to our experts. So we are here today with Stephanie, VP Small Business Strategy at Hub International, and Jonathan, who is CEO of Instant Risk Coverage. Hub is ONN's insurance partner, and they offer an exclusive insurance program designed specifically for registered nonprofits operating in Ontario. So over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Kavita. Really appreciate that introduction. And thanks to everybody for taking their valuable time today to join us. Really excited to be here. Hub International has been partners with the ONN for many, many years and provide the property and insurance coverage for all the members. I'm really pleased to be joined by one of our insurance partners, Jonathan DiPasquale from Instant Risk Coverage, and I'll let him introduce himself in a few slides here. But with spring in the air today, everybody's out and about on the streets. I think this is a really timely webinar, and we really want to address today some of the biggest gaps that we see in insurance for nonprofits, and that really is around event liability and event insurance. People often may think they're covered when they're not, or not sure when they need coverage. So again, really excited to talk a little bit more about that today and get into that conversation with Jonathan. Before we do so, I just want to tell you a little bit about Hub. And at the end, we will, of course, have time for Q&A. So Hub is one of the largest insurance brokers in Canada, and we really specialize by industry segment. So I just really want to highlight today our expertise and specialization in the nonprofit space. Speaking personally for myself, I have been in the industry for over 25 years, which is It's very scary to say, but it is true. And I've spent a lot of time in different areas on the underwriting side, the broker side, the marketing side. But where I find myself drawn back to is the nonprofit side. I'm just very passionate about this sector, as well as my colleagues at Hub. And we really are focused on growing this sector and supporting those members and clients that are within that. So you can see some of our stats on the board. After the presentation, Kavita, as mentioned, will be following up with some information, and we'll provide you with a link to the Ontario Nonprofit Network and Hub landing page. And from there, you can find valuable resources and links relating to insurance. And as well, you can request a quote or find further information. So really excited to follow up with that, share it with you. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Jonathan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie. To give you guys a little bit of detail about IRC, we are a partner with Hub and we work with them focused around making event insurance accessible. So we're a partner here that works and builds Event 5 with them so that you guys, when you have a event that is a little bit less traditional, it has a place where it can go. And so what Event 5 is a online insurance system where you can go minutes before your event, a year before your event, and purchase insurance with your partner Hub, right? So you have peace of mind that you're working with the broker that you've built a really strong relationship to facilitate these needs. What's great about this online system, it's not like you're going in there and you're clicking around and guessing and hoping for the best. You get a 24/7 support team. And so our support team here at IRC comes in to help you guys walk you through the process, but also works with Hub to tackle all those questions. What I'm going to cover today quickly on the event side is I'm going to go and show you guys what we consider and look at when it comes to events. Remember, we're going to be getting all these resources, so the link here to Event 5 will be readily available. But if you're curious after the fact, quick type on a Google to Event 5 Hub, and you'll end up finding this wonderful page. So on our next slide, we're going to look at event liability. And when we're organizers, usually we're thinking about event liability in a certain segment. So we like to call this our event liability iceberg. We used to have a ship going towards it as a risk of your event. We've taken that out and just made it the iceberg to make it a little bit more clear. But when we're looking at event liability, everyone is always thinking the top half of the iceberg, that biggest part that's sticking out, right? It's in our view. But when it actually comes to event liability, it's quite deeper. The lower part of the iceberg is really where a lot of the detail comes from when we're looking at events. So when we're looking at events and we're generating quotes, we're looking at the details of risk management, we're looking at the number of participants, the event duration, where the event is located, the event subtypes, whether it's a birthday party or it's a soccer tournament, event dates and the season it falls into. But when we really start getting into the nitty-gritty is what does your emergency response look like, your capabilities, your security protocols, your specific coverages. This is where you can start working with Hub and IRC to make sure that you build out this protocols so you're properly protecting not only your event, but actually your organization, right? Insurance is a great piece of this solution, but it is only a portion of what risk management looks like as a whole. So that allows us to sort of dive in and start exercising what actually fits into event liability. What's great when we move on to the next slide is that event liability is actually far more complex than just thinking about, oh, hey, what if someone trips over a box, right? And we're going to use that as an example briefly. But when it comes to event liability, these are things that are typically not extended out on your typical primary CGL. So we're looking at things where, hey, my event is happening outside of my normal operations. My event's happening outside, I have a climate risk that you may need to consider, right? And so we work with you guys to look at those risks and make sure that they're appropriately viewed at. Security risks, right? You're having an event on a roadway, right? This is something that's outside of your normal operations. You now have exposures there. When it comes to prevention management, right? What are those protocols? The nice thing about going into Event 5 that we're able to access those online portals and get hey, here's how I go about waivers. Here's how I look at third-party documentation if there's uh, a concussions or some sort of other injury. And then also what is the most important piece when it comes to event liability is understanding the uncertainties, right? The nice thing working with an event professional and making sure that you're putting a policy in place to protect this is that you're going to learn in the space of the funny and quirky things that can happen when it comes to an event risk. And that is sort of the most important piece here. So purposely, we're going through this relatively quickly because we really want to open this up to questions. But I always think it's important to preface this stuff with a case study. So this is a real life case study of two incidents that took place. One here in we're referring to Ontario. One took place in Vaughan, and the other one took place in Burlington. Both nonprofit groups. One are on our left side. Our nonprofit group there decided not to go get an event liability policy, and our nonprofit on the right side decided to get an event policy. So when you don't get an event policy, you're relying on your primary CGL. So relying on our commercial general liability coverage, right? It means that when we're relying on that, we're retaining all the risk within that. It means if we were to have a claim, there's a risk of us triggering our deductible and also that claim following us through our historicals, right? Depending on how your coverage is set up as well, as long as Hub knows your operations, they're going to be able to make sure that your CGL is properly appropriate. But if this is something that's a pop-up new that hasn't been indicated to Hub, there's also a risk of it not being covered. So we had one group that shifted it onto their primary CGL. And then we had the other group in Vaughan who got an event liability policy. So this event was a garage sale that they were doing outside of their normal operations. And what this happens is when you get an event liability policy, it's like putting something in front of your primary commercial general liability policy to protect it. So it's a successful move of risk transfer. And what that also does is it shifts it to a smaller deductible, which means in our case of a claim, there's less of an upfront cost. So these guys ended up putting together for their garage sale a $2 million liability policy. Both events very well run, very well organized. Unfortunately, both experienced someone tripping over a box. So a box was left in a walkway. Someone backed up and tripped over it and injured their head. What was the difference here when we saw this? So we'll start with the no event liability piece. They had no event liability. The insurer and the partner was surprised that they were doing garage sales. Lucky enough, they had a really strong broker, and their broker was able to facilitate and make sure that the coverage responded. What happened though is with this coverage responding and on their primary CGL is they faced a larger deductible than they would have faced with an event liability policy. And their insurance in the future has actually increased because there's a long tail risk here. And so what a long tail means is that it's tracked on their historicals for the next 5 and 10 years every time they quote against their coverage. So now they have to sort of live with the consequences of that claim and not having an event liability policy. Everything worked out, lucky enough, but it created an immense burden on the organization. The organization in Vaughan that had an event liability policy had someone trip over this box, same type of incident, and the event liability policy responded. So what happened is their primary CGL policy was not triggered. They had a $2 million policy with the event liability coverage. That ended up responding. Their deductible on that program was relatively small, around $1,500. They paid that, and they had the peace of mind that the claim was taken care of. When the claim was settled down the road, this no longer appeared on their report for their primary CGL. It was covered by this event policy, which led into a long-term view of showing to the insurer they manage risk appropriately, but also has continued to keep their premiums at a fair, affordable amount. So event liability is very important because it really protects your core coverage and continues to keep it operating what it's intended for. your primary operations. Perfect.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Really appreciate that. And I think that's a great example of just seeing the differences between purchasing the cover as not. One of the things I just want to highlight there, as your job as your broker, our job here at Hub is really to help you understand the differences when you might need a separate event liability policy or when it maybe makes sense to just absorb that under your CGL. So if you ever do have a question about what's the right time to buy, when should I buy it, always encourage you to reach out to Hub. Our team here, as we said, we work with Ontario Nonprofit Association members day in and day out to really understand each of the individual risk and create an insurance program that works best for that individual. So I'm joined, I know on the call I've got Jeremy and Shauna today who work with you as members day in and day out just to ensure that we're helping to coach and guide you on the type of coverage you need. So whether it is for event liability, your CGL, if it's a question about abuse liability, directors and officers, management liability, again, always encourage you to reach out to Hub directly whenever you have a question about any of those coverage lines. But really, again, want to get back into the event liability because, again, we do see that that is a big need within our nonprofit sector and want to ensure that you all have the same kind of or you'll have the resources and support that you need. So would really like this opportunity just to open up the conversation for any Q&A. I know Kavita was going to be looking at those for us in the chat. And as well, I believe some questions were sent in early to you. So we'd be happy just to open up the floor right now if anybody online's got a question or if you wanted to assist in the facilitation of that, Kavita.
Sure. I can get the ball rolling on the
Okay, great.
questions. So, I guess the first question, and maybe other folks are thinking this online too, is what types of events actually require liability insurance? Does it apply to sort of small community gatherings, or is it just like the big fundraisers?
Big fundraisers. Jonathan, did you want to take that one?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
In our point of view, every event that's outside of your disclosed operations on your primary CGL, you should be getting an event policy for it. You should also look at it and consider what is your risk tolerance if something were to go wrong with one of these events. So it's very common for us on our end. We cover everything from meetings of 3 to 4 people, all the way up to grand festivals and things along those lines. So you need to communicate with your broker, and you guys are in great hands with Hub to say, hey, what is our risk tolerance? Where do we see our comfort? Because they're going to give you the pros and cons of either side.
Thanks.
Great. Okay, so how about if the venue already has insurance? Do you still like, does the nonprofit still need to get their own policy as the organizer?
So when it comes to the venue carrying their own coverage, while that is great for the venue and is going to respond to the venue's needs, there's no guarantee that it's going to take your needs into consideration. And so when we have someone renting or utilizing a third party venue, our suggestion is always get an event liability policy. Even if the venue says, hey, don't worry, you're going to be covered on their policy, you have no line of sight to what that policy actually says. And you can find out in a claim scenario after the fact that that policy actually didn't cover you guys. And then you have the burden to defend yourself and respond to that claim without insurance. And that could be a very scary place to be.
Thanks, Jonathan. And I'd certainly echo those comments. And I would say that is one of the most frequent questions we do get. So appreciate whoever brought that forward. A lot of our clients come to us and say, well, they already have insurance. Why do I need it as well? So I think Jonathan did a great job outlining as to why that's recovered. And our recommendation would to always be have your own policy, whether it be that CGL or your event liability policy. So thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate that.
Okay, and so now we have some in the Q&A as well. So what slander or libel that might arise from public statements arising from incidents at the event? I guess, what about slander or libel that might arise from public statements arising from incidents at the event? Is that something that's covered?
Yeah, and I mean, I'll let Jonathan speak specifically to the event policy, but where we do see that type of coverage is under your standard CGL policy. So anything that was said, whether it was at the event, outside of the event, would fall to the coverage under your CGL policy. Policies will, majority of them have a sub limit within your overall and aggregate limits that would fall to that. So if it's something that has caused harm or perceived harm to somebody, that's where your CGL policy would specifically jump in to provide coverage on that. Jonathan, I don't know if you wanted to talk to the event side of that, but that's from a CGL side.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, when it comes to these types of media exposures, your CGL piece is probably going to be your strongest responder. An event policy here is not really going to jump in to cover that piece. Where you do have some relief that you can consider is a event cancellation policy in case of a political uprise or something along those lines because of statements that have been made. And so that's another route that your brokers at Hub can work with you guys to say, hey, I have this concern, and they can present these different options. And so if you're worried about your event being maybe canceled or impacted due to political statements or stuff like that, that is an event cancellation policy that can actually be put in place.
Okay, that's helpful. Hopefully that answers your question. And what about public spaces, like an event in the park?
Absolutely. So most municipalities do require you to come with third-party insurance. We also work with a number of municipalities about 500 across Canada, where their requirements are that you come in place with either a $2 million event liability, or a lot of them are starting to shift to a $5 million event liability policy. And these municipalities want to be named on these policies. So it is far easier and almost more so in your best interest to get an event liability policy to name them versus going back and trying to put them on your primary CGL, which most primary CGL providers are not too interested in going
Yeah.
down.
Yeah, that's a great point when it comes to certificate requests for something like that. We require permission from the underwriters to do that. And often, not to say that it can't be done to add them on as an additional insured, but there's a lot of scrutiny, a lot of underwriting that comes behind, which can cause delays as well. So again, this is where we're always really encouraging people and find it's in their best interest to have that separate event policy specific to that activity to protect that primary CGL coverage.
Okay, great. So the next question is, does event liability insurance cover volunteers who are helping run the event, or is it just paid staff?
So all event liability policies that are set up through this Event 5 program are going to extend out to the volunteers, staff, um, committee members, pretty much anyone in that space that you are occupying. And that's the purpose of this coverage is whether they're a staff member, volunteer, or even a guest. If something happens, you're going to have peace of mind that this policy is intended to respond to. And this is where pieces like the medical benefit come in quite a bit, where someone rolls an ankle, let's respond and get that taken care of.
Great, thank you. And now, can Hub help nonprofits that need ongoing event coverage throughout the year rather than sort of one-off policies? So, for
Yeah.
folks who run lots of events, not just like one gala type thing.
Yes, well, that is a great question, and I have a great answer, and it's great that Jonathan's here because we are able to provide solutions that provide coverage throughout the year. So we call this kind of a blanket policy, and it would cover all your events through the year. And our partners at Instant Risk Coverage have a wonderful solution for that. So like you said, we do have, some organizations that may have hundreds of events during the year. So it's for them to call every time or go on to Event 5, and get coverage every single time they're doing an event, it becomes quite cumbersome and quite burdensome. So we look at an annual kind of blanket policy that would provide coverage across all those events. So again, in those cases, if you feel like maybe, I know I'm going to have a lot of events this year, it would be best to contact Hub directly, and we'll provide again the contact and follow-up information. And we can guide you on that if it's better to seek kind of that blanket type solution or individual event coverage and go from there. But yeah, definitely both options exist. So we'll work with you to figure out the best coverage for your needs.
Sounds good. So now for folks who have additional accident insurance that covers staff and volunteers, is this fine for events attended by staff and volunteers? They understand it wouldn't cover sort of general participants, but
Yeah, I mean, I can speak on your CGL as well as your accidental, death and dismemberment or injury coverage. It would depend on the specific wording itself. So it's something we'd kind of have to dig into to see what's covered. Generally speaking, it would cover your employees, perhaps your volunteers, in most cases, certainly not participants, which is one of the big reasons you want to buy that coverage. So it would depend on the nature of the event, and what your current policy says to determine if coverage would be covered that way. Again, I would be wary of utilizing that or relying on as primary coverage if you're hosting something larger in scale. For smaller events, perhaps that might be a viable solution to shift that risk. But again, we'd have to look at the specific event, what your specific policy is intended to cover, because there may very well be an exclusion on it that excludes events. So we'd want to make sure that's something not there, and the coverage would extend. So sorry, not a very clear answer. It depends, but
that's okay.
it does depend on
It
that.
depends is still an
It
answer.
depends, yes.
Okay, so Gonzalo, I'm going to try to make two of your questions into one question. Okay, so they have a co-working space, and they have their own insurance, of course. But they're wondering if, because it's a co-working space and there's other users, do they need to get their should the co-working space be asking the bookers to get their own insurance?
So when you're operating your own facility and renting out, it is in your interest to get those people renting your space to access a facility user program or get event liability insurance. Because right now you don't have control of what's going on in that room, and they're relying on your coverage. It's very easy for them to have something happen and disappear, and you're going to be stuck with that. Because you're the landlord, you're going to be found 1% liable, which is going to mean you're going to be paying the full claim in most of these scenarios. So it is in your interest to get something there set up. There's with Hub, you can chat with them. There's lots of great options. You can look at a blanket. You can look at an online facility user program. There's plenty of options in here to mitigate this risk that are actually low or to even no cost to you guys.
That's a great point, Jonathan. And I would always encourage you to reach out, because I think people are hesitant to kind of seek insurance specific to events because they're concerned it's going to be excessive costs and they just can't absorb it at this time. But I think people will be surprised by, how cost effective some of these solutions are. So again, would really encourage people to either go through the Event 5 portal, you know what I mean, to get a quote, or come to Hub and take a look at what some of those price points might be. Hopefully you'll be surprised that they're a lot more cost effective than you might expect.
Okay, so 30 minutes flies by.
It
So
really does.
we're at a minute to go. So I'm sorry, Lisa, we didn't get to your question, but as Stephanie mentioned, we will be sharing their contact information, so please feel free to reach out to them if you would like more information on switching or otherwise more information about the events coverage and other coverage that they do offer. There's a different variety. So a big thank you to Stephanie and Jonathan for this sort of insightful events presentation. I learned a thing or two. Thank you to our participants for joining. Hopefully this was helpful. We will be doing another Hub and Lunch and Learn in the fall, so another sort of speed, rapid fire
Speed dating.
session
I
on
know.
insurance questions. We will share more information about that through our newsletter and social channels. And again, you will get a recording and the slides and some resources in the follow-up email. So thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.